It's just religion. It's just religion.
Hello and welcome back to RS in 5 or Less, where we try to let perfect love drive out all fear. Today we're talking about terrorism. The United Nations Security Council defines terrorism as a criminal act which intends to cause death or serious bodily harm to civilians or non-combatants with the purpose of intimidating a population or compelling a government or international organisation to do or abstain from doing any act. What terrorists are after is in the name: terror. They wish to create fear. I was 15 years old when the terrorist attacks of September the 11th, 2001 happened. I remember very clearly being in a workshop for a technology lesson and overhearing two members of staff talking about the attacks on the World Trade Center. Terrorists wish to produce fear and spread that fear. They wish to cause people to do or not do certain things. Sometimes terrorist acts lead to war, and sometimes war leads to terrorist acts. When considering the possibility, why does a person become a terrorist, we are faced with a choice of they were born that way, or they became that at some point in their lives. It seems unlikely that somebody woke up from a previously peaceful life and decided that day to become a terrorist. And as such, there must be reasons that people choose to commit terrorist acts and themselves become terrorists. It should be noted that most people who are classed as terrorists do not use that name for themselves. There have been a number of political figures who in their careers have been accused, and in some cases convicted, of committing terrorist acts, but later went on to be seen as legitimate political leaders. Examples are Gerry Adams, Martin McGuinness, or Nelson Mandela. For an extension, research these people's lives and come to your own conclusions as to whether these people should be viewed as terrorists or freedom fighters. There are so many effects of terrorist acts. In the first instance, bodily harm and death. But in the aftermath, it can be increased fear, increased security, less trust in those who are different from you. Some terrorists choose to take their own lives in committing their terrorist acts. However, the vast majority of terrorist acts do not involve suicide bombers. Some of the reasons why people choose to join a group or to go as a lone wolf and commit acts of violence and terrorism include being denied human rights for themselves or their people group. It could also be to bring about political change, having peaceful means having failed. Equally, some people use religious justification for their terrorist acts, although the governing bodies of all the major world religions unilaterally condemn acts of terrorism and violence. Having said that, there are examples of people who use religion as an excuse for terrorism. Examples from Islam are Boko Haram, and from Christianity, the Ku Klux Klan. However much certain people convince themselves that violent and terrorist acts are the true expression of a particular religion, it's very difficult to square that with the holy texts and with the religion as a whole. In Christianity, the book of Romans, chapter 12, reads, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." And within Islam, the 17th chapter of the Qur'an says, "Do not take life, which Allah has made sacred." It is important to note that no religious body of any of the major world religions says that terrorism is acceptable. Perhaps it is true that certain people will use freedom as an excuse to be violent, and certain people will use religion as an excuse to be violent, and certain people will use democracy as an excuse to be violent. Perhaps it is not the concept themselves which produce violence, but they are used as a justification for somebody who is already planning to be violent. As soon as you believe that another human life is worth less than yours, the seeds of terrorism can be planted. This is why religious views like all life being sacred or being made in the image of God are strong antidotes to terrorist actions and thought. Some questions to consider. Let me know your thoughts about these in the comments. If a person does a terrorist act but later becomes a legitimate political leader, should they still be tried as a terrorist under the law? What does it mean when a government or organisation can decide at will whether or not a person should be seen as a terrorist? If the aim of terrorism is to produce fear, what is the best way to overcome that? And what would be the most effective thing that religious believers could do to combat terrorism in the world today?